The following topic comes from parade.com and it is: what words would you use to describe your mother's influence on your life? One of the words I would use to describe my mom has to be very protective. And to a certain extent, it became overprotective. But at the same time, I'm grateful she had a protective mindset or overprotective mindset as opposed to an uncaring mindset. I don't feel like she viewed us as accessories. My brother and I were born during the marriage that my parents had, of course. And I think that she really tried to make things work. And as a result, I can say that she also is perseverant. She was perseverant within the relationship with my father, but she was also perseverant after the fact. I feel like if you go through a situation like that when you're splitting from your spouse, especially when you have very young children, it can be a little bit disruptive to your own function as a human being, meaning that you're going to be stressed, you're going to have feelings of frustration and anger that are unmeasurable. But I feel like my mom was able to not feed resentment. As opposed to being salty that the relationship ended, she was able to maintain a sense of responsibility, another word I would use. And I gotta be very grateful for that because very easily she could have turned into the kind of mother that, because she ended up a single parent or splitting in the first place, she is going to use the children as tools to weaponize, in a sense, use us to inflict hurt upon others. And instead, I feel like mom embraced it as, well, damn, everything is going to fall on me now. But at the same time, she had a degree of pride, another word I would use, because she took that pride and she was like, I am going to prove that I can be sufficient for my children to ensure that at the very least their needs to survive are always met. Let it be, I always had food, I always had clothing, I always had shelter. We could even go on summer vacations here and there. So I gotta say, my childhood was very good in that regard. It's just sad that in my personal outcome, at some point, something happened to me that my perception began to shift, and I didn't understand as I was growing up that it was the absence of my father, him being a ghost in my life, was having an impact on me that I didn't realize at the time. I knew how I felt. I knew that I hated my dad and I was mad at him, but I just could not figure out why. And the reason I mention him in a topic about my mom is because at some point, as I began to get older, and of course, my brother being older than me, I could observe that my relationship with my mom was complicating a little bit because she had to dedicate a little bit more attention to my brother since my brother was special needs for some time. And it's not necessarily that I had a feeling of jealousy. If anything, I was too arrogant as a child because I thought that because my brother had things wrong with him, I was better than him because I was not representing a problem for my mom. But at the same time, I feel like because of my brother's needs, he was overcompensated for. And I observe as an adult the effect it had on my brother. I, as the neglected, abandoned child, I have a good sense of how to live in misery. I am not intimidated by hardships. I don't get frustrated by hardships. And by hardships, I mean anything from the things that really get people who I see in retail, which is if the shelves are empty, if there is backed up traffic, those little things that irritate the fuck out of people for some reason. I'm okay with that. Sometimes we go weeks without power because of a storm. I'm not really frustrated by that. I'm not challenged by it. I'm not bothered by it. And the only thing that I can claim gets under my skin legitimately is when a computer is malfunctioning. That is the one thing in this world that can truly anger me to where you physically see it. And in a sense, because mom, I guess, could be more trusting of me being independent, I hate that I became independent earlier on because I didn't understand that something about myself was I needed love and affection. And I discovered as an adult that because that's something I don't get a lot of, I understand why it hurts. And it's because I have gone my whole life like that. My family is not a family of warm, loving, affectionate people. But unfortunately, I happen to be that black sheep who was born with a personality in which that is something that is important to me and it's something I yearn. And as an adult, I'm not getting that. And it took me blowing up at my mom last year for me to finally bring that out of me, express that, and share that, and also describe how I truly felt, what it truly meant for me to be raised in the circumstances that I was, in which my brother, if he cries and whines about something, he gets it. For instance, his dreams of being a pilot, it's been 100% supported, pretty much 100% funded. And then I thought, what about me? You mean to tell me that these resources were available there, but y'all didn't even bother to try to have the conversation with me? Y'all just accepted me saying, well, college is expensive and I don't have the money for that. And y'all said, okay, we're not going to do that. Well, flight school, becoming a pilot is expensive. We don't have the money for that. But for some reason, y'all decided to go through with it and invest in my brother? Huh? How the fuck is that supposed to make me feel? So, in a sense, I look at it as because my parents were together for 10 years before getting divorced, and my brother lived up to maybe like the first 5 years or so of that marriage, he was able to experience my parents being together. And I'm guessing he got his status as a prince in the family because this child was born during a time that the marriage was working fine. Whereas I was born during the time my parents were trying to reconcile. And by the time I came around, it was decided that they were going to separate and divorce. So for me, all I know is a single parent household. And as organized and thorough and caring as my mom was, I feel like I didn't have emotional needs met. But it also sucks that maybe the reason I didn't have them met is because I didn't know that I had those needs in the first place. All I remember as a kid is that I could have moments of being extremely angry or moments in which I could be extremely sad for no reason. And then I could also have moments of legitimate bliss, but I also had a problem with being cold sometimes. Like I would just see things, tell it how it is, or tell it how I felt it, and I would be considered inconsiderate or too harsh with some of the things I would say and think as a kid. And I understand why some things that I was thinking were cruel, especially about disabled people. Honestly, I would make mean remarks about disabled people because I was afraid of them. I didn't understand what it was like for a person to live with an impediment, and instead, because I saw them being so needy, I think in my brain, if I were to explain why I was reacting that way, maybe it had to do with the fact that I would observe my life at home with my brother and how my mom had to be behind him every step of the way. I saw him as a burden. So I learned to associate disabled people as burdensome. But fortunately, I did receive the orientation I needed in that matter, and my opinion about that changed. I just needed to be shown that I was in an erroneous mindset, and fortunately, that was addressed and it got rectified. That is something that I also like about my mom, that she had very good techniques, of course, as a teacher, granted, on how to rectify and correct certain behaviors before they turn into a problem. And something that she also did that I vividly remember is she would make us face our consequences. If we did something stupid, if we needed punishment, if we needed to face somebody and apologize to them or humiliate ourselves, we went through all that. Whereas I feel like the children I know, we are now grown, of course, who didn't have an experience like that, they have different behavioral problems compared to mine. My behavioral problems tend to be that, for instance, I can tell you the best one I can describe is work. When I get upset at work, it's like, as opposed to addressing the little thing that is upsetting me, I burn it all up. Say, at home, if I were to see a spider, as opposed to scooping the spider and taking it outside, I would rather burn down the whole house than trying to take care of the spider. At work, I feel like I burn down the entire department because I would rather rebuild it, reconstruct it from scratch than try to repair that issue, which ideally I want to repair that issue, but because after all these years I haven't seen results, then that's where my frustration came from. But fortunately, in recent times, like I have shared, it has transformed. It took just a few changes in management for that to improve vastly. And I went from wanting to tear it all down and build it from scratch to being able to work with what we have inherited, with what has always been there. So with mom, I feel like I may have picked up some of that from her. And the reason being because when she would start new relationships with some guys, I feel like she was looking for a perfect person that would never arrive. And I grew up somehow to be the kind of person who I would rather make things work and repair what I have than find something new. And I guess I cannot relate to why she would completely disqualify guys as candidates, especially so often, because I'm not her. I didn't go through her experiences. I didn't think like her. I wasn't raised like her. But I feel like she let go of some opportunities with really good men that I think, had she settled down, our lives would have turned out a whole lot different, a whole lot better. But also, there's no telling what may have happened behind the scenes that I'm unaware of, that I never heard about. But I also know that when I think about my mom objectively, if I were to observe her relationship with a man from a tertiary perspective, I'm sure that there are some things that she does that may come off as she has excess manipulative tendencies. And I can agree with that, but I think as someone who has been told that I'm manipulative as well, I think that we are seriously misunderstood because the manipulation that I ever exhibit is in an effort to manage my personal life adequately. And that is something that my mom could do. She was never, ever evicted from a place, she never had delinquent fees. She was the over excelling adult. You know how we have overachieving students, over excelling? Well, my mom has been that adult in my life who the only mess I know she ever got into was her car wreck last year. Only got pulled over. She had moved and her ID still showed the old address because she was waiting on some papers to come through so that she could officially do that stuff. It's documentation that we had to leave somewhere, and we arrived on some weekend and it was just a mess. And the person we were relying on to help us couldn't really just 100% dedicate to us. So it was just an unfortunate timing of this cop pulled us over at just the right time before we realized that it was a requirement by that time to have that documentation updated. That was it. It was just her little ass driver's license. For some reason, depending on where you live, it's a big deal if your license shows to be from another state versus being from the local area. So anyway, lesson learned. I don't even think she got a ticket for that. I think she got a warning. I don't remember her having to go to court for any of that. But see what I mean? She was always that adult that you knew had her shit together. And I can tell you that when she runs into someone who doesn't have that mindset of having your shit together, she will intervene. She's the kind of person to be like, you just moved in. Why haven't you updated your address? You just moved in. When are you going to change the addresses on all your bills? Why do you still have the old address? When are you thinking about getting a job since you just got laid off? Like, as soon as today, get that ball rolling. There's no time for like considering, reflecting, wondering why, all that stuff, all that lamenting stage. No, there's no lamenting stages here. It's the moment they boot you, you're out there looking for the next position. Whereas some people need some processing time or something to get their mind together. I can say that as an adult, I have exhibited that same behavior that my mom showed. And I guess when you are in relationships with adults, that may offend the other adult because you are not a child. And children are the ones who need to be pushed like that. You need to be behind them, repeating, repeating, repeating. Did you brush your teeth? Did you brush your teeth? Go brush your teeth. Get up, brush your teeth, and all that stuff. But an adult doesn't want to hear that. However, it took me a while to learn that as an adult, it is not my job to repair a broken adult. But if I know you, I think I'm a good friend, a good girlfriend, a good colleague, if I have the guts to tell you and show you and prove to you when you're wrong, why you're wrong, and the path to rectify it. I am sorry that maybe you were not raised with the same discipline. I wouldn't be like that if I didn't hear you complaining about the issues you have that you inflicted upon yourself, but you try to describe yourself as the victim when it's your fault. And an example of that would be I once had someone tell me that they were not receiving certain papers, and then I thought, well, when you moved, since you moved, you told me you moved, you went to the corresponding offices to update your addresses, and that way your mail is going to show up at your place. I didn't do any of that. Oh, you failed to be an adult. Another time, it was something about how someone was complaining about how they had two bills they were behind on. Therefore, they incurred some fees and they were upset about how they have to pay those fees just because they were maybe like a week late at paying them because the due date did not align with their payroll schedule. And then I thought, well, unfortunately, every place ever that bills you, they have that policy of you will get charged a late fee for being tardy with your payment. So perhaps avoid that late payment from happening in the first place. I know that you cannot magically make more money appear in your account, but you could have asked me. I could have helped. You could have asked somebody else. Maybe they could have helped, or maybe you could have asked two people, and between their half and the other person's half, they can cover you. Just make sure that you're responsible about getting back to them within a reasonable time frame. And remember, when you get paid next time, that you are indebted, and don't spend that money irresponsibly to where you fail to pay the people you owe, and that way you damage the perception of the people who lent you something. When I have had to borrow money two times in my life, I made sure that those people were the first people to be taken care of the next time I had the money readily available for me. And I gave them a little extra, just like my mom showed me. She always said, anytime someone does a favor for you, try to give some interest back. She did that for me too. Sometimes she had an idea of how much money I had based off the bucks that my grandparents would give me. And she was like, do you happen to have $40 on you? We are short on this bill. I'm gonna give it back to you plus some extra next time I get paid. And back in the good old days, my mom was a salaried employee. She only got paid once a month. So she made sure to explain to me that she hasn't forgotten about giving me my money. It's I have to wait. Because of that strict, organized, disciplined manner of my mom adulting and me witnessing it, but also, I guess, experiencing it from a secondhand perspective, given that she involved me in her adult matters, I always fucking knew everything. And I don't understand why there are some adults, especially adults older than me, who somehow are unaware that they have to stay up to date with certain things. And then they get shocked when they get delinquencies and all that shit. And I'm like, what do you mean problems are finding you? You found the problems through your inaction. If you're someone who has forgetful tendencies, like you don't feel that weird pressure in your gut that you have something pending, that anxiety you get to where you feel you're being crushed by some invisible force, you need to carry a notebook and write shit down. Clearly, you cannot trust yourself at having a sense of responsibility. And that is something that my mom really inculcated to me, borderline in an intimidating way, because she could have the same firm tone I'm using right now, that same assertive tone. She used that on me. That is the only way I know how to project this situation, because that is how I learned the lesson. But you better believe I never forgot it. And as an adult, I've never had problems. The problems that people be talking about and describing and expressing that again is their fault, I can't relate. And I owe that to my mother. But I also feel like, unfortunately, back in those days, I was bred to be this perfect being at managing my responsibilities, such as academic, and I grew up to be the adult I am with my shit up to date and all of my matters are sorted. But in the process, I was not given other kinds of attention. I wasn't given the amount of affection that I needed, the amount of, you could say, even validation that I needed, because for some reason, no matter how good my grades were, sometimes I would have doubts about how I would perform on a test, even if it was a science class, an English class, those classes that I absolutely destroyed. I always had that insecurity. And one insecurity I'll never forget is, for some reason, when I was a sixth grader, I never thought I would make it to eighth grade. Sixth grade was the grade that middle school begins, and eighth grade is when it ends. And I was a sixth grader who knew an eighth grader, and I thought, all that you're describing about your eighth grade, the classes, the teachers, the intensity of the homework, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I'll make it to the eighth grade. And I remember her name and last name to this day telling me on the bus, you'll make it to the eighth grade. And then when I made it to high school as a freshman, I just could not imagine a life in which I made it either to my junior year or my senior year. I had insecurities. But as a teenager, I never could put my finger on where those insecurities were coming from. And I think that my pride developed the way it did because I was creating my own shell to be my own cheerleader, because externally I was not getting that. And for you to be your own cheerleader, it can be, for me at least, as someone with a horrible relationship with myself, it is a pretty daunting experience. And I think that in that situation, I needed my mom to be that person. But I don't know if she was either emotionally unavailable or she was just trapped in her exhaustion of, it's been decades of her living in this situation where she had to look for two young people and she was pretty much by herself. Fortunately, there is such thing as government aid, which she was able to take advantage of, because for some reason that court decided that giving us like $7 for me and $10 for my brother, $17 per month total for child support was acceptable. I have no idea how that happened. My mom didn't make a lot of money as a teacher. My dad, he had like 3 fucking jobs, but maybe because he worked for the government, maybe he was able to talk some shit behind the scenes and make some things work in his favor. I don't know. I don't care. But I don't know that. I don't know the man. I don't know the guy. Whatever. He was just sperm donor for my existence. Here I am. I'm grateful for my life, no matter how underwhelming it's been to this point. But see what I mean? That is that comparing and contrasting that I have to take into account when I'm talking about my parents. Because for me, it's easy to say that my mom was rough with me, but we also need to consider why. And I'm pretty sure I understand the why that is now. Fortunately for my mom, I was not a trouble child. I was not a problem child. Everything that she taught me, I didn't have any issue applying, but my development, I was showing the symptoms through my selfishness and cold demeanor and all that, that I needed love. I needed affection. I didn't need punishment. I didn't need aggression. I didn't need to be yelled at. I was literally crying for love, but as a child I didn't know that's what I needed or wanted. And that had my mom began to shower me with love and affection, I think I would have been embarrassed and pushed her away because I'm not associating her with that. Mom, some words I would describe her with are definitely responsible and positively influential, to where when once you meet her, you will learn something from her. She is a great teacher. But also, I think that she could be overprotective and overly critical. I remember when her stuff with the wreck last year happened, I said, well, you are now acting like a problem child because I, as an adult, have resources that you need now. You need a car, you need help with processing the situation and all that. I'm glad you didn't get hurt severely. I'm glad you didn't die. But see what I mean? You only come to me for the serious things, for the adult things. I feel like you always come to me as your adult assistant, and that's not pleasant. But again, I don't blame her. After decades of being continuously on the grind with us, she wants a break. She deserves the break. I just hate that I had to be the one in that position just because I was good at it, because she pretty much turned me into a mirror of herself when it comes to my strategy at managing my adult life. She became that older person who, for some reason, you have unnecessary ignorance, like one of you guys taught me, and you started to lack confidence as an aging adult. Another thing that one of you guys taught me as well, when I asked what the hell is wrong with old people, to where you become someone who cannot function without asking about everything. Suddenly you don't know how to turn on your car, you don't know how to turn on your phone and charge it, or you don't understand why it's off and it won't power up because it ran out of battery. Those little things, like, what is going on? And to begin to observe my mother's decline in some areas, it was hard because I looked at it as, I've never had you at your best season, because your best season was consumed by someone else or something else. So, in a sense, I had a close connection with my mom about how I knew I could tell her things. I knew how to talk to her about anything. But the problem is that if there was something in my future that would potentially bring her stress, she would shut me out. When it was time to talk about my college, she wasn't very present or involved. I just told her, look, the reality is, how eager are you to get indebted for this? Not very eager, right? Well, I don't want to do that to you. I don't want to go to school feeling guilty that we are starving so that maybe I can land a good job. We all know how it ended up happening anyway. Look at COVID and what it did to people freaking out, begging for forgiveness on loans from the government. I know I would still have loans and all that stuff. So I think ultimately I made the decision of picking misery rather than complicating my life. And I'm glad that mentally I can exist blissfully in misery, as opposed to I live in misery, but I'm resentful of the misery I live in anytime something that resembles comfort is taken from me. I don't care when the shelves are empty. I don't care when gas prices go up. I know how to cut back, as opposed to I need to desperately pick up on extra hours to make ends meet. No. So I take great pride in that. And I think that living humbly is a very important lesson that I learned from my mom. It was a combination of her deliberately doing it, but also my interpretation of life at that point. I looked at it as, well, we are limited in resources, plus my brother is being a leech on my parents because of his issues. I'm not giving issues Fortunately, but maybe I needed to give issues so that I would get some attention. I think that mom balanced things the best she could. Looking back, I am sad that those seasons are over and that I didn't get to live them fully based off what my needs were, with my needs and desires satisfied. But at least I can say that presently, my relationship with my mom now is better than it used to be when we were closer. And I guess that explains the whole sometimes you need distance. And I think that mom also needed her own experiences, especially retiring, for her to realize that her stress was turning her into a monster, but that wasn't her fault. And because I was able to witness what having children did to my mom and what having a job consume you did to her, I said to myself, I am going to do things unlike her. That's why I don't have the crazy job that consumes all of my day. And I also don't have unnecessary, stupid things to be impressed by, such as subscriptions and whatever y'all like to waste money on. And I also like to be humble with my choices. I don't have to be buying up a new wardrobe every year. I don't have to be buying up new bedding or changing it for the seasons. Those little things, those little stupid goddamn details that people like to care about, and ultimately it just superficially enhances the appearance of a space, but what does it actually do for you as a person inside of you if you don't even remember the man who lives with you, you don't know his birthday? True story. I asked someone who I worked with, I know your birthday, but I don't know your boyfriend's birthday. When did you say it was again? And her boyfriend worked with us. That's why I was asking. And she was like, I don't even fucking know. I don't even fucking remember. It usually comes and like I may realize that, yeah, it's his birthday, but something has to prompt me that it's his birthday. And I'm like, do you even know his phone number? Do you even know his license plate number in case something happens? He disappears or his car gets stolen and you're the one driving it, anything like that. And that detachment, you not knowing someone who literally lives with you, those details, I can't be that clown. I gotta care for you. And I guess my ability to remember shit about people comes from that. Like that feeling of being neglected and feeling forgotten about and feeling like no one knows me well. I didn't want someone else to feel that way because of me. Me inflicting that feeling upon someone. I will know everything about you. And I take great pride in that because I feel like you should be able to make decisions on someone's behalf without them being present and without having to consult them. If you have to consult me over how to order my sandwich from Subway, you got issues. You should know what I like and don't like by now. Well, there you guys have it. That's going to be it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this topic inspires you to look inward and think about your parents, whether they have moved on from this plane of existence or they're still around. Have you ever actually taken the time to try to reflect on why things turned out the way they turned out with them, whether you lived a life of privilege or you feel like they underserved you in some areas? Do you think you could explain right there on the spot, on demand, why things turned out the way they turned out in your past with your parents? I can say confidently, 100%, I can do that. I can say that, and I have evaluated from everybody's angle. And it's something that, at least to me, given how methodical and thorough I am, it took me years to get there. But now that I'm there, I feel like I've done my work at developing my character to be what I need it to be so that I can live a life that doesn't get more complicated from here. For instance, if I need to be held accountable for something, I face it, I go through it, period. I don't have to try to justify or claim to be some victim when I'm the victim of my own choices and actions, all that shit. No, no, no. Things are the way they are, and period. And that's why I just go with the flow and I'm able to stay calm about things going on in my life. Okay, that's it. Bye.